Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Cooper, the president of Central Oregon Writers Guild. Hello, everyone. Welcome in the audience. Thanks for coming. I'm going to run over to this computer and I'm going to just kind of go through our events. Should we turn the light on?
No, here.
So on the screen, we have our Central Oregon Writers Guild landing page, meetings and events. This is our, on the left side, we have the things that we're doing, our Writers Guild meetings. So today we have the meeting, our meeting stating a state of the agent panel. We've got 3 agents with us tonight. And I'm just going to go down the other side over here too. So we also list all of the events that we know of in Central Oregon. So over on this side of the page, we have, well, we're down to June 14th today. It's my daughter's birthday. Happy birthday, Bella. So we have readings. There's a reading at Roundabout Books. There's not much else going on the rest of this month. Blank Pages Writing Workshop has a salon. Well, I shouldn't say there's not much else going on because the library has the surprising form of memory, Writing the Pen Tomb with Laura Camp on June 21st. And we have also our quarterly workshop with Julie Swearingen. And she's going to do a social media workshop. So Julie is an editor and publicist and helper of all people. And she's going to talk us through the world of Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and how to manage as an author within that world. So there are spaces left for that, and that's this Saturday, 1 to 4 here in the library. That's a live one. So definitely sign up if you can for that. And that is pretty much it for this screen. So I'm going to stop share, and we're going to, I do want to mention, thank you very much to all of you who who submitted to the member anthology. So we closed that out the other day, last, gosh, what was it? End of the month, I guess. And so we're compiling all that. We've got a cover. We're trying to get everything organized in there, and we should have that published in the fall, by November is what we're shooting for. And I think so far we're on time. And we've got, I can't tell you the number of entries. Do you know the number of entries, Mary? Lots.
35 or 40.
Yeah, 35 or 40 entries, and we've got 237 pages of submissions, which is great.
And we have not yet sent out acceptance notices. So
Right.
if you didn't get one yet,
Right.
Don't worry about
So
it.
we have an editorial meeting this week, and we'll get back to everyone by next week, hopefully, and let everyone know what's going on with that, right? Okay, so I'm sitting here chatting with Mary, and Mary is our featured reader coordinator, and she's going to introduce our featured reader tonight. And if you can come on up here, Mary, and kind of right where I'm standing. Yeah, in the dark. I probably for when. Yeah, let's do that. I'm sorry. We'll turn it back off.
And while they're working on the lights, before I introduce our person, next month's reader had a family emergency and she had to be rescheduled. So I am looking for a reader for next month. If anybody's interested, you can see me at the break. Okay. So, Heather Mcneil was the Youth Services Manager at Deschutes Public Library for 20 years, retiring in 2019. She served on the Caldecott and Newberry Medal Committees, which are the annual awards for the best in children's literature. She's also a professional storyteller. Heather represented the Rocky Mountain area at the National Storytelling Festival and performed at international festivals in Scotland and New Zealand. Heather is the author of 2 books on early literacy, one of which was just published in April, and 2 books on collecting stories in Kenya and Scotland. Her current writing project is a teen novel set in the ecologically devastated future and featuring illegal fracking, a wolverine, two street people named Jaguar and Leopard, a girl trying to find her mother, and a kidnapped pygmy goat. Please welcome Heather Mcneil.
Hello, my name is Heather Mcneil, and I am going to read from my teen novel, which is called What She Knows. And it is geared for teens like age 14 through 18. What She Knows. Prologue. The emaciated elk pawed at the trickle of a stream that once tumbled and twirled over rocks. Instinct, or perhaps the fog of starvation and dehydration, kept him from eating moisture-filled snow that covered the ground. Ravaged by poison, the elk bellowed in pain before falling to its knees. In death, his tongue lolled across his chin as if still searching for sweet water. The wolverine mother imagined her three kits mewling and chirping, anxious for her return. She had left them to search for food, but now she was dying, poisoned by the elk. She would not live to reach her hungry kits. A final spasm clutched at her heart and she crumpled into the snow, the GPS collar still blinking until it too would stop. Three bald eagles feasted on the wolverine. In time, they would fall from the sky, victims of a poisoned world. Hunger soon drives the three wolverine kits from the safety of their den into a melting habitat. They do not know grief. They do not know that in order to survive, they must reach snow. They are unaware that 600 pounds of Ursus americanus, bear, now making his way across fields and through forests, will end one of their lives. What they do know is they are cold and hungry. What they do know is they crave their mother's warm body and rich milk. What they do know is each other. Chapter 1, Coral. Camille. Coral's sneakers pound on the pavement. Her shoulders hunch and her chin tucks into her neck as if she is about to slam through a door. She mumbles, "We promise never to keep secrets." And then I find that letter and that document and she acts all huffy as if I don't have a right to know. I'm 15 and I do have a right to know, and she has no right. Coral approaches the apartment's front door and shifts the 2 tuna cans and bread loaf to her left arm, so the other is free to dig for the keys in her right jeans pocket. I will not give up this time. I will get the answers I have been requesting. I will demand the information I'm entitled to, and I will finally know the complete truth about me and my mother. As the lock turns, she is wishing she had mayonnaise for the upcoming sandwich, but there was none on the market's shelves, and she wasn't going to be out any longer than necessary. So a dry sandwich, no chips, a few sips of precious water, and some genuine explanations from her mother are on the menu. The lock turns easily. She enters, and for several moments she is motionless, staring, processing, and trying to understand the incomprehensible. The home where she lives with her mother and Camille and many, many books. The home where she knows exactly where to find her backpack and the best chair for reading, and the African violet that needs to be turned a quarter degree every month so the pink flowers blossom throughout the plant. The home that has been her haven while she avoided the chaos outside. That home is no longer the home that offered reliable, predictable comfort. Trying to make sense out of what has clearly been ravaged and demolished, Coral thinks, earthquake? I think we're on a fault somewhere. Maybe I knocked over the couch as I left. Mom is really going to be. I need to put the books back so she can find. There is so much dirt on the floor. Why is there so much dirt on the floor? All of these thoughts are simultaneous and incomplete. It is the one about the dirt that snaps Coral to attention, because the dirt is from the violet's pot, and the violet now lies on the floor, broken, roots exposed, and the life-nourishing dirt scattered across the living room's beige carpet. Brown dirt shows up quite clearly on beige carpet. A 100-year-old painting of the long extinct blue whale is slashed, as is one of the Grand Canyon, during the time when the Colorado River tumbled and plunged along the route carved out over millions of years. Sofa pillows are ripped open, the fabric contents spilling out like the gutted entrails of a hunter's quarry. The dining room table chairs are upside down and books are everywhere, randomly discarded after being pulled from the shelves. Coral slowly moves her head to the left, to the corner where Camille rests, and her knees buckle. She falls to the floor and the tuna can falls from her hand, rolls across the floor, and bumps into the trophy she won for her junior year essay, The Biological Effects of Global Warming on Rocky Mountain Predators. The golden likeness of a quilled pen and paper is now in two pieces, and she notices that the hollowness of each half reveals that it is not actually solid gold in spite of the outer shine. She focuses on that because she doesn't want to see what remains of Camille. She continues staring at the trophy, wondering more odd, inconsequential thoughts. No one has written with quill and paper for centuries. Strange choice for an award in the 22nd century. And why would they break it? Intentional? Random? Oh, and who are they? She now understands that while she was purchasing bread and tuna for a dry sandwich, her home was invaded, ransacked, plundered. That is why the lock turned so easily. That is why there is dirt beneath her knees. And that is why she is now shaking and finding it difficult to breathe. For several minutes, she remains kneeling, her head bowed, so all she can see is the floor and her knees. Eventually, she raises her head and looks directly to the corner, to Camille. The cello is destroyed and gutted. Broken strings flop in random directions. The scroll lies by itself, looking more like a fiddlehead fern about to unfold than the carving that once graced the neck's beginning. Half of the spruced front is smashed and Coral can see inside Camille, which makes her feel as if she's looking inside her own body, searching for a heart that is still pumping. The tailpiece, the bow, slivers and chunks of the body are scattered on the floor, evidence of the violence that shattered him, violence that Coral can actually feel, as if an arm was ripped from her own body while a leg was being shattered. For Coral, this is not just another broken object in a room full of broken objects. This is a death. It was spring and Coral was wishing for rain, the kind of rainy day she knew about only from books, not because she lived in the desert, but because rain was rare, like snow leopards and mountain gorillas. She wanted a whole day of wetness when she washed her hair in the rain and caught raindrops on her tongue and splashed in puddles. At 10 years old, she wasn't too old for splashing, but there were never puddles anymore, just brief showers that evaporated before dampening anything. No one had lawns, just brown, crunchy yards that crackled under shoes and stung bare feet. That's what she was thinking and bemoaning when she walked into the living room and announced, "It's too hot to practice. I'm just going to my room to..." And that's when she met Camille. Coral was 9 when she first heard the voice of a cello. She knew she wanted to play an instrument, and since music was no longer taught at public schools, she knew it would have to be private lessons. Her mother agreed, rationalizing that she could cut back on groceries and gas if and when gas was available again. What they couldn't agree on was which instrument. Her mother suggested the violin, Coral suggested the guitar, her mother countered with piano, and Coral, feeling a bit ornery about the whole process, fought for drums. Finally, her mother suggested her daughter listen to The Carnival of the Animals, written over 200 years ago by Camille Saint-Saëns, to see which instrument sang to her soul. It was a wise suggestion.
Good, everybody's here. Thank you for joining us. Last week, I wanted to say, the New York Times reported that in 2021, nearly 827 million print books were bought by readers, roughly a 10% increase from 2020, a record since BookScan started tracking this stuff 20 years ago. But of the 3.2 million titles that BookScan tracked, fewer than 1% sold more than 5,000 copies. Now, while there are myriad ways to publish your work on your own, be it hybrid or self-publishing, prematurely publication, those seeking a traditional path, whether at one of the big four houses or an indie or boutique press, writers most often have to gauge their success by the quality of the rejection. And that rejection usually begins with literary agents. That one passionate advocate who can be so instrumental in your getting your first book deal. And there are so many reasons for rejection. So much has changed in these past 27 months. We're now kind of moving into a Netflix and other streamers era equivalent in the publishing world. So Sally Van Heidsma Literary, and I thought this would be a good time to have an open discussion about where we're at in the publishing world right now, what challenges, what things have fundamentally changed, and felt that longtime agents, Andy Ross of Andy Ross Literary, Ken Sherman Associates would be the perfect people to offer their unique perspectives as well, because they have a good gift of gab. So without further ado, Sally, engage.
All right, well, Ken and Andy, one of the things that, I was talking with Michael is just how much has changed in terms of just the technology part, as far as like Book Expo, no more Book Expo. A lot of the conferences have had to move online or hybrid. The difficulty getting paper and books printed and delivered, and contracts and publishing schedules delayed. And so I just wanted to kind of get a sense from both of you how that's affected you and your clients and shepherding their work through the whole process.
Well, I find it's always been difficult. There's, as Michael said, there's a lot of rejection in this business. And one of the things I have to tell my clients is that they just can't take it personally. It's sort of like if you're an ingenue actress in Ken's line of work, it's you audition a lot and you don't get hired. And it isn't because you're not a good actress or actor, and it's not because you're not a good writer. It's marketing considerations. In Hollywood, they want somebody with blonde hair and blue eyes, and you've got brown eyes, so you don't get hired. And in the book business, the decisions get made based on marketing. We had a book like this a few years ago and it didn't sell well in Barnes and Noble, or this seems a little too dark for reading groups. It has nothing to do with how good a writer you are. So I think if you're submitting to an agent, we're looking for books. I get great stuff from the slush pile. I'm negotiating a movie contract from somebody I met in the slush pile. One of my clients is a United States senator who I discovered in the slush pile. So there is gold in that there's slush pile. And so, but you should just be aware that there's a lot of rejection in this business. I get rejected a lot whenever I submit a book. I get 20 rejections and one person who loves it. I tell people my life is sort of like my social life in high school. It's gotten harder, it seems like, in the last couple of years, getting a deal with the big four. And I don't know why. It also, they're taking much longer to respond than they used to, probably because they're working at home and they're taking care of their kids and that kind of stuff. But they are, they're still looking for good books, and I'm still looking for good books. So I think, it was slow last year in 2020, but I was looking at my slush pile and sending out projects just as I'd always done.
So, I've been hearing, that, it's been kind of a bumper couple years with books, ebooks, audiobooks. Has that translated in higher advances for your clients?
No, publishers, I think the critical year was 2008 when there was the economic downturn. And unfortunately, 2008 was the year I started my agency. So I really
Yeah,
don't
I
know
was like
before then.
2010. Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
people I know who had been in this business said that it changed dramatically and that
Right.
publishers got much more conservative and books where they might have gotten $150,000 advance before they were, selling to small presses for $10,000
Right.
less. So
Right.
that's when things really changed.
So you don't see more kind of opening up on, when you hear about the profits are going up, that's just kind of not trickling down.
My impression is, sounds like Michael was looking at the statistics, so he may know more about this than I do.
Mhm.
That even though book sales are pretty good right now, it's a narrow, it's bestsellers that are doing really well.
Right.
Patterson is selling a lot of books,
Right.
but that doesn't translate necessarily to the mid-list, which is always
Right. So it kind of goes up. Well, I always remember that formula, like the 10% of the books support the whole enterprise. The rest of the 90% don't make enough money to cover their costs or something like that.
Well, Michael seems to think it's even worse, that 1% of the books sell more than 5,000 copies.
Yeah. So Ken, do you, with this sort of marriage of streaming content, people binge watching all these series, this kind of sort of cornucopia of things to watch on TV, and so much of it's driven by books that are being adapted. How has that affected your particular work? And
I think it's actually helped because there is a great demand for product for Netflix and HBO Max and all of the other ones. I have to admit, I'm one of those people who spends a lot of time at 2 a.m. watching the new limited series on HBO or Netflix or wherever. But I
Right.
enjoy doing that because I can learn and get a sense of what other people might be enjoying, or what the companies, those companies in particular, or Apple, are looking for, because, and some of them are really lousy, but every so often there's some gems, and you say, I think, just to cut through some of this, when I'm looking to take on a new client, which means a new writer for my company, I'm looking for not only the quality of the writing, which I hope is always totally original, is not aping somebody else, but it's totally original and has its own voice. And though it may be story-wise or character-wise similar to more successful, or similar to successful book series or television series, I want to make sure that I can possibly sell those rights, film, TV, and stage rights. I've had the luck of having a call from Cameron McIntosh one day. This was many years ago. Andy's heard this story before, where my then assistant said, Ken, there's an Englishman on the phone, and he wants to talk to you about the rights to the Witches of Eastwood. This was written by, the book was written by John Updike. I was handling his film and TV rights, and the book had become a major feature. And I thought, oh, this is a friend doing a goof. Cameron McIntosh is the producer of Cats, Les Miserables, Miss Saigon, and Phantom of the Opera. So I pick up the phone. Hi, Cameron. Hello, Ken. This is Cameron. And we then did a dance for a year and a month with him, with his American attorney, with his London head of his company. And it took a year and a month to negotiate stage rights for the musical that ended up premiering, having its world premiere in London, and played for about a year and a half. Wow. It was unfortunately not as big as the others, but it was a very exciting and educational process. because here was an established writer with a super successful film, and somebody else said, what else can we do with it? These are the things that when you're submitting to an agent, you want to find an agent who maybe ideally handles film, TV, and stage rights, so that you can say to them, I understand you handle those rights. If you can find a way into the offices, it's not that easy, because we only have a certain amount of hours in each of our days. And maybe Sally and Andy, you can talk about what you do on an average day. I don't think there is an average day, but there are certainly days that are similar to other days.
Well, I have a question for you, Ken, because I've been getting this question a lot. And if somebody wants to submit to an agent like me, it isn't that hard. Their databases online, like agentquery.com and querytracker.com. You can basically hit a button for whatever genre you're writing in, and 200 names of agents pop up. You look at their websites, you make a query letter and a book proposal, and you send it out. And it's true, you'll get a lot of rejections, but like I say, I have found some very good stuff in my slush pile. And people have been asking me, they said, oh, and then I say, okay, people get frustrated because they get hundreds of rejections. And I say, well, you might want to go to a writer's conference where at least you can sit down with somebody for 10 or 15 minutes. And, if for no other reason, they'll feel obligated to look at 10 pages of your stuff when they get back home. But what do they do if they're looking for an entertainment agent? They can't, there is no querytracker.com for entertainment agents. How do they find you, and how can they, most entertainment agents don't look at their slush pile, I don't think. So what do you recommend?
One thing to do is to seek out the name of the writer for the movie or the television series or the play that you've liked, and go online and see if you can find that agent. Unfortunately, what happens is here in so-called Hollywood, there are so many people wanting agents for their screenplays, as well as their books that they feel can be made into a movie. And technically, I will say I will not read unsolicited material, but in reality, if someone sends it in politely and succinctly and say, Ken or Mr. Sherman, however you want to approach me, would you mind looking at my material? And here it is. Here's a one-page synopsis. Here's my bio. And here are the first 3 chapters. Don't say, hey, should I send it in to you? No, take the initiative, have it right there. And more often than not, I or someone in my company will look at the material and give me opinions if I haven't been the one to read them. And we go from there. It's a problem of time in a day. Very often when I get up in the morning, sometimes that's 2 a.m, which is when I turn on HBO Max or Netflix, and suddenly it's 5 a.m. and I go, whoops, I hope I'm not tired all day. I go to my emails and I answer from Andy or Sally first, because we know each other. We have history of working together. And I then deal with contracts that might be in process of negotiation, or dealing with the responses of producers or executives at networks or studios to get a dialogue going. Very often it's also interfacing with my clients, and dealing with the day-to-day business, the frustration. As you've said, Sally, and you, Andy, it's very frustrating out there. There are so many times that we face rejection. We're the first ones to get the rejection, by the way. I don't know exactly how you both do it, Andy and Sally, but we get it, and we have to have a real thick skin. I do not have a thick skin. I wish I did, but then my job is to call my client or to call Andy if Andy has brought me a book and I'm trying to sell it.
Yeah.
Or you,
I've gotten rejected by my friend Ken more often than almost anybody, but that's because I send so much stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I have sent things to you, Ken, and you're like, not for me. Boom. And I'm like, okay.
sorry, what's your name again?
Yeah, yeah. But you know what, I
Okay,
actually do appreciate it because, no, I mean, I would rather get a rejection than spend 6 weeks chasing down the editor who you thought was interested. And then they call ghost, they start ghosting you, I guess it would be the modern term. And you're like, they just disappeared. They, just, if you don't want it, just say no. You kind of keep thinking, oh, maybe they got sick or they're super busy, or, give them all these excuses, like a bad boyfriend.
It's kind of a sad state of affairs when the greatest virtue of somebody like Ken is they reject you really quickly.
Yeah, well, no, it's kind of like, I actually like it because then you can kind of move on. You're like, okay, that's that.
Ken's a really good agent. I heard back he rejected me in 24 hours.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I also respect that, Ken knows what he wants, and he's he wants what he wants, and that's cool too.
I always send it to Ken first.
Yeah.
You,
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying about ghosting, I've had this conversation with many people in the last months. I hate it. I feel if I'm taking my time to submit something to somebody, it's because I respect who they are and we might be able to do good business. And by the way, there's two parts of being a writer. There's the creative part, which is when you write your book or your screenplay or your stage play. And then there's the business side, which you need to learn about. But it seems to be that people think it's cool not to respond, even though they've read the material. I mean, ideally, when Andy or Sally sends me something, I'm going to read it right away because I respect both of them. And I know they're not going to send me BS stuff. It's a troublesome thing. But we have to. I've taught a class, Andy knows about this, I don't know if you do, Sally, called Facing Rejection Head On.
Yeah.
And it turns into a group therapy session because people are saying, I sent this in 3 months. There's a lot of whining, but it's good whining to get it out. But what are the reasons that people don't necessarily say yes to your material? They may have a writer who writes similarly, and they don't want a conflict of interest. They may just really not respond positively to your material. You said, Sally, and one of you said, read the first 10 pages. I don't know if it's a vanity or it's not laziness. I feel we sort of get a sense of who the writer is very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the idea of going to a conference, you have this wonderful library group, but I think it's important to go to conferences when you can talk to other agents and hear how they've been rejected or how they've approached agents. And you meet agents at conferences and you maybe have 5 minutes with them, or some of them, like Andy and I know, and Sally too, at the San Francisco Writers Conference.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a line at our table, 15 or 20 writers deep, and we have 3 minutes and you've got to pitch your story and not go into autopilot, and hopefully have us say, hey, would you send that to me? Here's the email address. I like that. That sounds really interesting.
Let me interrupt right here because this is getting very depressing for some people. And I just think it's important to know that even though there is all this rejection, I'm in business to sell books. That's how I earn my living. And so I look at my slush pile every day and I find really good stuff. And we're all looking for really good stuff. So even, and there's a lot of deals being made. It's just, there's a lot of stuff out there, and there is a lot of rejection, but you've got to manage it. You've got to understand that people are looking for material, both for books and for movies. And if yours doesn't, if you don't get a match for your book, you got to move on to the next book.
Right.
You don't want to give up. I know so many writers whose first 5 books were rejected, and then something happened and they established themselves, they established an audience. It's a challenge, but we're all looking for books.
Well, I
No.
think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, don't forget, we each have our own taste in books, in people, in writers, in life in general. Some people don't like hamburgers and they like a steak. Some people, I don't have to explain that. You're right, Andy. It's not that we're getting dark here. These are just some of the practical things that we as agents have to deal with. But I'll tell you something. If I read something that makes me sit up, and I've started on page 1 of the book, say I have the entire manuscript, and I finish the book and I'm not aware that I was reading. I was so involved in the reality of the words that the author has sent me. That's what I'm looking for.
Right.
What I'm looking for is I want to get to the last 6 letters of the manuscript at 3 in the morning, THEEND, crying like a baby. Okay.
Yeah.
I always say, if I don't cry, I don't buy.
I'll be a little bit more woo-woo here, but sometimes I would say that I've had this experience of having like a contact high, like you're reading it and you actually, not just a story, but you feel.
Yeah.
You just
I feel it right here when it's happening.
And you just have that, it's like, it's this thing.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, what are you looking for? And I'd be like, I don't really know that I wanted a story about this or that, but it's sort of like, we get the New Yorker, and that's kind of one of the things I wanted to mention too, is getting to the craft and not submitting your work until it's ready, and kind of doing a lot of the work. And I really am, I always feel like I tell people over and over again, you have to read a lot, even if you're a writer and you want to write and get your book out there. It's so important that you have absorbed, classics or, contemporary, read books that have been, gotten major awards, so that you kind of have that in your subconscious to help you with your craft. Because sometimes I remember meeting a lot of people at writers' conferences where they were just so focused on their project and they were obsessed with writing, and then you'd read their material and it was just not, I would just read a lot of words. It just seemed like one word after another, and I didn't get any kind of connection to it. And I'm sure there was a lot of issues with, just straight, narrative, exposition, grammar, all those things they just were not coming together.
Well, one of the things that I learned last year, because business was a little bit slow, I started doing some freelance editing, mostly fiction. And people, what they wanted me to do was mostly evaluate their plot and see if it was working. But what I was finding out is their problems, your plots are important, but somebody said, I think it was E.M. Forster said, there's really only 2 plots. A stranger comes to town and a man goes on a journey. But, and so the issue that I saw was not, if you have a good story, although that's important, but how you tell that story. And people had huge craft problems. Plot structure was only one of them. Some of them were at the word level. And that's what we're all looking for. We're looking for voice. And what is voice? It's ineffable. It's very difficult to teach, but it's very easy to see. And every agent I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sally, will tell you that they can see in the first page, sometimes the first paragraph, if a person has voice, if a person has talent. That doesn't mean that their book's going to work. A lot of books kind of fall apart on page 75, and an author with huge talent loses their path. But the key thing that you need to figure out a way to develop a robust voice. And if you haven't done that, it doesn't matter how clever your plot is, you're gonna have difficulty.
I would like to say on that, it takes time. I found with a few clients, I remember one client, he was the son of a famous artist, and he had come to LA from London, and his dad was bankrolling him with a 1-bedroom apartment near Paramount Studios. And this crazy kid, he was 19 years old, I was introduced to him by a collector of his father's work, who was a well-known writer, who had a shelf of books, like 12 deep, 14 deep. And he said, would you mind reading my script? And I said, I'd be happy to. I was thrilled that somebody thought I might be helpful in this guy's life. And he gave me the script, and it was extraordinary in the area of plot. And I said, but Lem, what about the characters? Yeah, what about them? Where? Oh, yeah. And then he would write another script, 7 or 8 scripts in. And I'm saying the same process works for books. Just because you've written your first novel doesn't mean you are a novelist yet, but it's a good start. And maybe you're going to write 6 or 7. On his 6th or 7th new script, he wrote a script called The Marvel of the Haunted Castle. And I took that script and sent it to a young executive at Fox Studios. I'm giving you these fantasy stories that are actually real, so you can be aspiring towards these. And I wrote and I said, David, this is one of the most imaginative scripts I've ever read since I've opened my company. This was back in 1837. And he called me a week later, the executive, and he said, Ken, I really wanted to bury your nose in that, in your totally over the top cover letter to me. But you know something, you're right. And here's what I want to do. I want to option the screenplay. That means that they would have a certain amount of time to do anything they want with it, and it couldn't go to anybody else. And I've already given it to a director who loves it. And actually, we've already given it to our production people. They're already designing sets, are going to be. And oh, I forgot, I want to put him under contract to the studio. Now, this is a 19-year-old kid who never went to college, but he has a great innate talent for storytelling. Isn't it all about storytelling? All of this is about storytelling. I'm getting long-winded. I tend to do that. My apologies. But please jump in. But you know, we're looking for great storytellers.
Right.
And it's not
But
using.
again, this, you know, this is really pretentious. I'm sorry, but it's also really true. How many people have read The Birth of Tragedy by Friedrich Nietzsche? Me. Well, anyway, Nietzsche said that the highest form of art was Greek tragedy. And the reason is because it combined the two great spirits of Greek thought, the spirit of Apollo, who was the god of reason and rationality, and the spirit of Dionysus, the god of ecstasy. And when you're writing a novel, a great work of art has to have both. In other words, you have to have that inspiration. You have to be able to, you know, what is the story? But then you have to be able to shape it into something that really works. You have to master the craft. You have to learn how to write dialogue.
Right.
You have to develop characters. You have to be able to define the dramatic question of your story and not get off into you know, getting sidetracked. So you have to have inspiration, but then you have to shape it into a work of art.
And I think it's incredibly important. You mentioned characters. To me, that's one of the most important things that I look for. I think we give another example. I represent a book called Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. It came out in the last year. It was sent to me by one of the publishing houses asking if I could help set up the rights. I flipped over the book because she's such a great storyteller, but the characters were smart and relatable. And I contacted a producer who I've worked with off and on with for many years. she read the book and she said, oh my God. And she said, do you mind if I take it to so-and-so at Paramount Television? And the executive overnight read it because of the muscle the producer has, it's a woman, and said, yes, and I've given it to, and she mentioned a particular actress who they have under contract, who said, oh my gosh, I want to play the mother. And the mother is the main character. And it was about somebody, an actress who can get her acting chops into this character and make us cry. There's that idea again. And it's now in development. We're waiting to hear what the pilot writer will do. What is he going to write?
I think most books really are about character. Plot, I mean, they say that commercial books are more plot driven and literary books are more character driven, but it's, you know, and I know a lot of writers when they're putting together a query letter and they say, well, is this commercial, is this literary? And, you know, they fret about it. And it's really more of a continuum. And I think both literary and sort of upmarket commercial editors see books really about characters and how they're transformed. And plots are more a device that allows the story to progress with a character who is transformed into something better, something worse, but something different.
But why would we watch on CBS, NBC, HBO, whatever, for hours, a limited series of 6 or 10 hours, if we didn't care about the people?
Mhm.
So just think about that as you're
Right.
forming and writing your books.
We just finished a series called Gentleman Jack. Have
Yeah.
you saw?
Oh yeah, I want to watch that. I've heard good
Oh,
things about it.
it's oh my gosh, it's unbelievable, and it's based on a true story. This woman's diaries that were in some cryptic code that were hidden, not translated for like 100 years, and it's amazing. I highly recommend it. But yeah, speaking of character, and it's really good. We just watched the finale last night. We're just like, ah!
Don't say that yet. But don't forget, you want to be able to pitch your idea in a couple of sentences, or at least pique our interest, so that they tell us more.
Mhm.
And I really believe that if you can't pitch your idea in a couple of sentences, the core of it, the characters and the plot, whatever area, you may not actually understand your own material
Right.
yet.
Right.
Yeah, I see that a lot with query letters, and I tend to be a little more flexible than you Hollywood guys. But still, if you can't figure out how to say what your story is about in 5 or 6 sentences, then you have to go look at your story and see if maybe there's a problem there. I did a little exercise for myself on my blog, which is I took the ultimate challenge, which was to take the longest and most complex novel in Western literature, War and Peace, and make a query letter out of it and try to reduce it to about 5 sentences of what the book is about. You know, there's 25 main characters. It wasn't easy, but I did it. I succeeded, and I called the blog entry the greatest query letter ever written. It helps if you have the greatest novel ever written, but
Right.
that may not happen. But one of the things I don't like to see, everybody wants to ask questions about query letters, and we can get to that. But when somebody comes to me either in a query letter or face-to-face, and they say, this book is about X, but it's also about Y. When I hear that, I can be pretty sure that the author has 2 great ideas in their head and wants to shoehorn them both into one project. And that happens a lot, and you have to be really careful about that. And typically, one of the ways I earn my 15% is to tell them which idea is good, or to say you need to do it into 2 books. Usually, one idea is pretty good, and the other idea is just awful. And so that's part of my job.
Well, one of the recommendations I always had, especially when I was meeting authors and they were struggling with their query letters is, imagine that you're trying to describe your book project like the capsule description on your TV guide through your cable. I'm always really so impressed with the 2 sentences for the movies or the series. And it's not just a description of what the story is about, but it uses language that colors your understanding. Is it going to be a horror, comedy? You know, all of those things are embedded in the way that the TV cable guide descriptions are. And I always think they do a pretty good job when you're kind of, you know, you're at the 2 a.m., you're trying to figure out what you want to watch, and you just start looking at these, you know, 1 or 2 sentence guides on your cable, and they're pretty accurate in the language that they use. I always
I'm
thought that was
wondering whether we should stop for a moment and let people ask some questions.
Oh, okay, sure.
Is that okay?
Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes, we can hear you.
Great, okay. And I don't know if we have any questions online, but those of you who are watching us, is there?
Yes, we got
Oh,
one
there's
question.
There's one on Q&A.
Yeah.
So those of you online, go ahead and stick those in the Q&A and we'll just open it up to questions here. Who's got a question?
So Ken, you mentioned that you have been working with this guy with 6 or 7 scripts.
I unfortunately can't hear you.
Okay, you might have to come up and just.
Yeah, Ray, why don't you go ahead and step up onto the mic?
So
Yeah.
you mentioned that you work with this guy through 6 or 7 scripts, and I was wondering if that's a normal relationship that you would have with someone who you're representing.
I would say that that is an example of what I feel a real writer is all about. He kept an open mind, and he took my suggestions. He was out of his mind to listen to anything I had to say, but he seemed to think I knew what I was talking about, and I was probably winging it the whole time.
Boy, I've done that.
Oh, we all do. But I think that's what a writer is. I was about to say before we went to Q&As now, you know, what is a writer? A writer is someone who can't not write. It's not something you do on a weekend only. It's you finish your book and you say, I've got to the end. Oh my gosh, it's not about him, it's about her. And you have to go back and rewrite it. Or Andy or Sally give notes of you know, where they think it might go because they see some spark in what you're doing, and you rewrite. And then you have other ideas. And sometimes it is the 2nd or 3rd or the 4th novel that you've written that it shows that you've learned how to tell a story on paper. When I say on paper, I mean computer paper, however it is. But it's just that you write and you write and you write. And hopefully you aren't derailed by the agent who turns you down, because you really aren't going to know the reasons unless the agent says so. Or your family. Worst people to send things to are your family. They love everything you write. You need to get into writers groups, which you can do online. I'm sure that many of you are in a writers group here. And I'm not saying you have to write 7 things like Lem did, but you need to keep writing and learning. And Sally, what you're saying, going to movies and reading books, how can you not know a bit of your market? But also, what is a good writer? Who inspires you? Have fun with it. Be serious, but have fun with it.
Don't be in too much of a hurry. I know I have had one client who was able to write an almost perfect book. I got it and I said, you know, this is brilliant. It's like Mozart. The problem is it needs to be a little more like Wagner. And she said, oh, no worries. I wrote it in 2 weeks. I'll get it back to you. I'll fix it and get it back to you in another week. Well, there are people who are like that, but not very many. And I think she was bipolar, you know, and, you know, she would rewrite something brilliantly one time and then 2 weeks later she'd fire me or something like that. Most of the writers I know and most of the books that I have taken that I really admire the books have taken a number of years. And I don't know, I imagine most of you have read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, but she had a very famous chapter called Shitty First Drafts, which she believes in, and I believe in them too. And then the cliche you always hear is writing is rewriting. And some of this can take a long time. Don't be in too much of a hurry. It's really easy. One of the things that the more I do this, the more I'm sure of this, is that writers do not have the perspective of the reader. How can you? You got these characters, they've been in your head, living in your head for years in 3D and Atmos, 7.1 sound. And but the reader might see it differently. The reader might just be bored, and you will never know that. That's one of the things I do as an agent is try to I try to be the advocate of the reader and to tell you when this scene just isn't working. It's boring. I don't care about this character. I don't like this character. There's too much, scenery. Trees are green is too much metaphor. Be a poet, don't be a novelist. And it's hard for writers to see that on their own. It's also hard if you're getting advice from whoever it is you wake up in the morning, or if you're writing a YA novel and you show it to 15-year-olds, because you're not going to be selling it to a 15-year-old. You're trying to sell it to an agent who's probably not 15 years old. So just be aware that even though there's this, you're infatuated with your story, you don't have the perspective. You need someone else to help you through that.
And I think what you're also saying is that if we feel that you are the so-called diamond in the rough, or there's something of great substance, we'll work very hard with you.
Right.
Get the material in condition to send out, because you are our reputations. When we send a book to an editor, they don't want to have 7 books from us that they thought were really boring. They're not going to pick up their phone from us.
There's question and answers. If you click on the menu on the bottom, I think there's about 5 or so, if you want to look at those.
Yeah.
Can you read
Yeah,
it out to us? Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy to relay for you. Sally, would you like to take those, or would you like my assistance?
Excuse me, what was the question?
We have a couple of questions that have come in that are kind of 2-parters, in which the person, the querent, has put in additional information. I am happy to help moderate, or I can pass it over to you to take it over.
Are you speaking of like Carrie Walker?
Yep, Carrie Walker and Andrew.
Okay, I can speak on the memoir as far as doing it as a book proposal. It kind of depends if the memoir is sort of more of a personal journey and it kind of has almost a novelistic. You wouldn't even necessarily need to have a book proposal. However, if you have a memoir, I represented a book about a young animal biologist that raised a barn owl in her room for like 20 years and had kind of this relationship. And so I crafted as a proposal, because it gave me an opportunity to sort of give context to what she was doing, her background, a couple sample chapters, her credentials, platform. And then of course I put this beautiful backlit image of a fluffy owl in my proposal, which you're not supposed to do. You're never ever supposed to add images to your proposals, but this photo was so amazing that every editor I sent this proposal to wanted to see it. It was pretty funny. And I did sell it to Simon & Schuster, so it all worked. But yeah, in that instance, it really just kind of depends on the project. If someone has a story that has like a scientific angle to it, or something that puts it somewhat in a nonfiction technical, I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but I would make that judgment kind of at the front end as to whether I thought it deserved a book proposal format.
I kind of see things differently. I used to agree with you, but lately, I think it's always better to have a book proposal, even if you've got some intensely personal memoir. It certainly isn't going
Okay.
to hurt. And some editors will want one. It also, book proposals, I know people are afraid to write them, writers are, but they're very good and they really help you. And sometimes, it kind of forces you to define what your book is really about and to think about it, not just sort of from your head, but how it's going to work in the real world. What are the books that are sort of like it? Who's your audience? And I think even a personal memoir could benefit from that.
Okay. Yeah, I always have book proposals. I actually like writing them or helping my author write them. And I think it definitely refines the process of the marketing and the platform, and you find out what other competing books are. And it really, I feel, making them very succinct. I always try to have like an overview, like, 3 or 4 pages. So it wasn't, you really want to get them into reading the sample chapters to kind of pull them in. So.
I think that sort of covers Jessica's
I
question.
guess that takes care of, Jessica Hill had a question about memorists needing a book proposal, and I think both of us covered that. Anything else to add? Do you have anything to add to that, Ken?
No, I don't.
Let's see, fantasy sci-fi genre. Any thoughts on that?
I've done it a little bit. I've done some YA fantasy. What kind of thoughts do you want to hear?
Well, he just wanted to know if it's as popular as it has been in the.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It's if you got a good project, people want it. If you don't, they don't. It's like everything else.
I love fantasy and I love sci-fi. And if you watch what's being produced film and TV wise these days, there's a lot of both of those, particularly the sci-fi stuff. But the trick is to make your material a little different from everybody else's, and to know the difference and to be able to support the differences. If someone says, hey, you're a really good writer, tell me more about this book. Tell me more about your characters. Or where's this going to go? You have 3 or 4 books beyond this. This is the first in a series. So I love those things. I blame it on my dad. We went to see War of the Worlds and The Day the Earth Stood Still in a double bill when I was about 8 years old. And I've never been the same since. If you don't know those movies,
one of the things about genre fiction, which would be sci-fi, fantasy, mysteries, romances, is they tend to be more kind of trend driven than other types of genres. And I know when I first got into this business in 2008, I was looking at all the deals that came down in Publishers Marketplace. You guys should subscribe to Publishers Marketplace, by the way. They post all the deals that happen every day. Well, probably not all of them, but it's always kind of cool to see what's getting bought and who's selling it and who's buying it. But when they were the only kind of fantasies that I saw being published, I was looking at YA in particular. Everything was paranormal, zombies and vampires, and then at a certain point there was nothing new you could say in those genres. And then dystopian was very big, but there really is nothing new to say in dystopian. There's only like 3 stories ever. And so that the trends change. It's impossible to write to a particular trend, because by the time you figure out what that trend is, the train has left the station. So you just kind of got to write what you want to write. But hopefully you'll be lucky. And you'll hit the sweet spot.
Well, I also think you kind of, as a writer, you should be kind of collecting the zeitgeist of your culture and time, and knowing that, we've all been through 2 years of this sort of isolating, somewhat dystopian for a lot of people kind of reality, that people may be more focused on uplifting positive stories now. Like they might be a little kind of overwhelmed and stressed out. I was reading some items online how if you want to see trends that had to do with people looking for joy and escapism and sort of positive stories that are uplifting and a little bit of a backlash to the dystopian. So, it's good to be mindful of that, I think.
Next question.
Agents refrain from accepting clients if they previously self-published, especially if they've been published traditionally.
I get a lot of queries from people who say they've self-published a book and it's sold pretty well being a few hundred copies. And they want me to represent them and sell it to a major publisher and take it to the next level. And that just doesn't happen. I think it's fine to self-publish a book. My book on how to write a book proposal, which I recommend, was self-published. And but I think they're looking for your next book, not to republish your self-published book.
Ken, do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with what Andy said.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't necessarily, I've represented clients that had self-published, but if they had a new project that I really liked, I just it didn't come up. I figured if they want to Google him and see that he's done these other works or she's done these other works, that's fine. But to me, it's a brand new forward going project. And if it has the potential, then that's what matters to me. But yeah, I think I don't, especially when they'll say, oh, I have these books that I published like 10 or 15 years ago. No, that was never something that would appeal to me. Oh, let's see, no more questions. Let's see.
I have a question.
Okay.
Hi. What would you say is the biggest differentiator, or should be the biggest differentiator for people deciding between self-publishing and traditional publishing, given that Michael gave a pretty bleak outlook for traditional publishing path?
Well, bleak though it may be, you may end up having to self-publish because it's gotten hard to get published by the major publishers. There are some advantages to self-publishing. I self-published my book on book proposals, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, but you have to do your own marketing, and there is a sort of a being published by Knopf means something rather than being self-published. So it's helpful for your platform or your reputation, stuff like that. But this is the best time in the world to publish, as long as you realize that most of those books are self-published books.
Yeah, and also self-publishing is appropriate if you have a really niche kind of subject, like, if you're doing something that's like a industry targeted, and the large trade publishers don't think there's a big enough audience for it, it kind of puts the burden on you to show them that there is. The process typically would be that, agents are going to choose projects that they think that they can find a large publisher to know.
I think what we're also talking about is the frustration of waiting to see if an agent's going to read your material,
right?
Or publishing house, if we can get it into the house where the editor says, oh yeah, send that over. It becomes very frustrating. And there can be lots of reasons, again, that things are turned down, but you've spent so much time thinking about and then writing draft after draft of your book that you may just say, the hell with it, I'm going to self-publish it. And what do? you have maybe 200 copies printed and you give them to all of your family members and they go, ooh and ah, and then the other 150 sit in your garage in a box.
Well,
And
now
what
they
do you
do print on, they do print on demand, so.
Right,
it's easier.
right. That's another way of doing it.
Well, and you do have to be, you have to be very cautious in the self-publishing world because there are so many different people that will try to sell you services, and it can get predatory. They will promise you certain exposures and marketing, and then you have to pay more to be up, keep going up this food chain of more attention, which doesn't necessarily equate to selling more books sometimes. And it's sort of heartbreaking when people end up spending $6,000-7,000 with, an editor and then a marketing and a publicist and all these things that they're willing to pay. And I mean, if you have the means to do that, it might be a fun project to do, but if you don't, it's very kind of, I always feel sort of tragic outcomes sometimes.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for your time.
Mhm.
So I've heard from a lot of people, and I have several friends who have published traditionally and several who have published on their own, that agents wouldn't even look at their stuff if they didn't have a huge social media platform. And I'm wondering if that's true, if that's changing as the algorithms get harder and harder to play, or if it's really a thing that if you don't have 10,000 Instagram followers or a 5,000 person mailing list that you're not going to get looked at.
It's not a thing for me. I think you should probably try to mine your social media, but it's been oversold. I know people who are very good at Facebook or whatever, and it doesn't really move the needle. What's more important to me for nonfiction is platform. And what is platform? Everybody is endlessly fascinated about that. I tell people that platform is either you have an endowed chair at Harvard or you're sleeping with Oprah's hairdresser. Either you're an authority on the subject you're writing about, or you have access to promoting your book. Fiction, you don't have to have platform so much. It's nice if you platform is your previous book sold really well. And when that happens, it's very easy for me as an agent to find a publisher for you. Accordingly, if your last book bombed, it becomes extremely difficult to find a new publisher. Even if you were published by Knopf or something like that, it becomes a problem. But if you, and it's good for you to use social media, and I always like it if you're really adept at it. But I don't think I'm going to get, if you have 100 followers on Instagram, that's not gonna be a game changer if I'm trying to sell the book. Ultimately, the book has got to be good. The publisher has to visualize an audience for that book. You have to have the authority to write about what it is you're writing about. And then they do expect you to market your book. And one of the sections of a book proposal is a marketing section. And you have to lay out a business plan. How are you going to market the book? Yes, I have 100,000 followers on Instagram, and I'm going to give away a blah, blah, blah. And you don't want, when you're doing your marketing plan, you don't want to, kind of engage in wishful thinking. Like I would be, I might get on Oprah, I might get on Fresh Air. We don't use the word might. If you have a solid commitment from Oprah, then yeah, you should say it. I remember I have a client who is greater than God in his field. I told him to write a book proposal. And one of the things he said is, I would be willing to be interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air, time permitting. So yeah, you should become adept in the ways of social media, but that is not gonna land you a book deal.
I think,
Sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was going
Sally.
to say, I think years ago when we were all kind of fascinated with social media, and that was definitely what was being pushed, but I think there's such a glut now of social media that it only seems relevant to me is if the project that you're pitching has some element of social media in it, like you're an influencer, you've been doing TikTok makeup tutorials, and now you want to do a book on makeup, that would be relevant because it ties in. But just to kind of like, oh, I have a, if you have like a novel, what's more important to me would be like, oh, have you had any of your any short stories published in various anthologies, or have you gotten any kinds of recognition in the literary world? Those are all things that are definitely helpful to get editors interested if it's a first novel that you're trying to get published. So
I was going to say, some agents will ask questions like that. I found in my experience that more often than not, it's someone who doesn't have social media background or following, that they simply know they've learned how to write a book. That's what this is all about. This is, again, I'm going to say it, there are two things. You have to write the book, and then you have to put on your hat as a business person, which is what our job is to recognize your brilliance as a writer, and then to take it into the business part of selling your material. I'm more interested in the quality of the writing. And I, whether I read 5 pages or 12 chapters or the whole book, that's how I decide if I want to take it on. And if I can use my reputation, and I'm sure there are people who, think I don't know what I'm talking about, but there's some who maybe do. I'll take it to those people, and hopefully they'll say, Ken, you've got, this is a wonderful writer. Why didn't you bring this person to us 2 days ago? Something like that. I want the material, and it's a bonus if you have a following. But what is the following to? Following of your short stories or an earlier novel that you self-published? I don't know. Those are the questions that I would ask. It can't hurt, but I want the material. I want your beautifully written, totally involving novel. And we haven't been talking about nonfiction here, but the same thing, so that we can find the right editor for you, ideally to make a major publishing house, who will give you the time, will take the time to read your material and say, let's make a deal. Let's have a contract.
Let's finish up with one last question from Carrie, the one that's online there, and she asks how you got into the business, how you became literary agents, and would you recommend it? If each of you could share a little bit about that, we'll finish up with that.
Well, I was in the book business probably longer than anyone else, just about. I used to be a young Turk. Now I'm an old turkey. I studied, I was in graduate school, and I was studying German intellectual history. And, I had a dark night of the soul and decided that I would rather own a bookstore, which in the 70s was kind of a little sort of a hippie fantasy or something like that. So I got into the business for all the wrong reasons. And I started a little store in a small town in Sonoma County in California. By the way, I was at the University of Oregon. I was in Eugene when I made this decision. And then about 5 years later, Cody's in Berkeley came up for sale, and it was sort of a legendary bookstore even then. And I was 29, so I didn't think I was cut out for it. But I just, on a whim, really, I decided to just call them up and make them an offer. And I did, and they were very happy to offload it onto me. And I owned that store for 30 years. Wow. And then, people's tastes changed and they started buying online, and Cody's closed. And I didn't know what I was going to do because I'd been doing it all my life. I thought I'd be sacking groceries at Safeway, but I woke up one night again, and all these decisions that sort of changed my life were sort of impetuous and kind of random. Really, it was like waking up in the middle of the night and saying, maybe I'll become an agent. I wonder what that would be like. And I did that in 2008, and that's what I'm still doing. I like it a lot better than owning a bookstore, by the way, even a legendary one.
I'll try to keep my story short. I was working at an alternative weekly newspaper in San Diego, and kind of on a lark, I decided I wanted to just meet with a well-known literary agent who had an office in Del Mar. And so I called and made an appointment, and just to kind of find out more about it. I was just curious. And then she offered me a job on the spot because somebody had just quit because, and so then that's when I started like what they call first chair and just reading all these manuscripts, and I kind of got the bug. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, obviously we all have different backgrounds. When I was young or younger, I had asthma as a kid, and my folks had a pretty good library, and I had to stay home all the time because of, I actually started faking it because I loved reading so much. And I remember, I think I was in the 3rd grade. My mother and uncle and aunt had all read the original Oz books, The Wizard of Oz. There's not just one. There are like 21, 22 of them.
Right.
And my mother and father had a box of them, and I would read one a day. That was my goal. And I'd be on the floor reading these. And then as I got older, I kept reading and reading. It was a passion for me. I could escape from school, which seemed so incidental at the time. And as an adult, I kept reading. And I remember I graduated from Berkeley with a degree in psychology and went off to Europe, which turned out to be 2 years later coming back. And I would read all the American books I could get, English language books, I should say, and having all sorts of loneliness and writing in a journal. I was so smart then. I don't know what's happened since then. Because I've gone back to read some of them, it's like a stranger in a very strange land. And I came back from Europe totally listless, and a friend set up a meeting at one of the large agencies, and I went in to meet the president. And the next day I had an offer to go into the mailroom. I didn't even know what an agency was. So you guys are really smart coming here and listening to what the three of us think agenting is about. And
still in the mailroom.
Yeah, that's good. And it just sort of evolved from there. I was working at one point, just to learn the business, I was working with actors at the William Morris Agency for almost 5 years. And then I went to another company and they handled writers, and I felt I'd come home and have been there ever since.
Yeah, I think the universal theme of all the literary agents I've ever met is they just love to read. And so it was kind of, a way of blending your personal passion with professional career.
Exactly.
Well, Sally, Ken, and Andy, thank you very, very much. This has been really enlightening, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And Michael, thank you so much for getting these folks organized for this event. We really appreciate it. Round of applause, and I'm sure there's